Section 1 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nancy Midlin, Oakland, California. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letters to her sister and friends during the embassy of Mr. Wortley, from 1716 to 1718. Letter 1. Rotterdam, August 3, O.S., 1716. I flatter myself, dear sister, that I shall give you some pleasure in letting you know that I have safely passed the sea, though we had the ill fortune of a storm. We were persuaded by the captain of the yacht to set out in a calm, and he pretended there was nothing so easy as to tide it over. But, after 2 days slowly moving, the wind blew so hard that none of the sailors could keep their feet, and we were all Sunday night tossed very handsomely. I never saw a man more frighted than the captain. For my part, I have been so lucky neither to suffer from fear nor seasickness, though I confess I was so impatient to see myself once more upon dry land that I would not stay till the yacht could get to Rotterdam, but went in the longboat to Helvoetsluis, where we had voitures to carry us to the Brill. I was charmed with the neatness of that little town, but my arrival at Rotterdam presented me a new scene of pleasure. All the streets are paved with broad stones, and before many of the meanest artificers' doors are placed seats of variously colored marbles, so neatly kept that I assure you I walked almost all over the town yesterday incognita in my slippers without receiving one spot of dirt. And you may see the Dutch maids washing the pavement of the street with more application than ours do our bedchambers. The town seems so full of people with such busy faces, all in motion, that I can hardly fancy it is not some celebrated fair, but I see it is every day the same. 'Tis certain no town can be more advantageously situated for commerce. There are 7 large canals on which the merchants' ships come up to the very doors of their houses. The shops and warehouses are of a surprising neatness and magnificence, filled with an incredible quantity of fine merchandise, and so much cheaper than what we see in England that I have much ado to persuade myself I am still so near it. Here is neither dirt nor beggary to be seen. One is not shocked with those loathsome cripples so common in London, nor teased with the importunity of idle fellows and wenches that choose to be nasty and lazy. The common servants and little shopwomen here are more nicely clean than most of our ladies, and the great variety of neat dresses, every woman dressing her head after her own fashion, is an additional pleasure in seeing the town. You see, hitherto, dear sister, I make no complaints, and if I continue to like traveling as well as I do at present, I shall not repent my project. It will go a great way in making me satisfied with it if it affords me an opportunity of entertaining you. But it is not from Holland that you may expect a disinterested offer. I can write enough in the style of Rotterdam to tell you plainly in one word that I expect returns of all the London news. You see, I have already learned to make a good bargain, and that it is not for nothing I will so much as tell you I am your affectionate sister. Letter 2, Vienna, September 8, O.S., 1716. I am now, my dear sister, safely arrived in Vienna, and I thank God have not at all suffered in my health, nor, what is dearer to me, in that of my child's, by all our fatigues. We traveled by water from Ratisbon, a journey perfectly agreeable, down the Danube, in one of those little vessels that they very properly call wooden houses, having in them all the conveniences of a palace, stoves in the chambers, kitchens, etc. They are rowed by 12 men each, and move with such incredible swiftness that in the same day you have the pleasure of a vast variety of prospects. And within the space of a few hours, you have the pleasure of seeing a populous city adorned with magnificent palaces, and the most romantic solitudes, which appear distant from the commerce of mankind, the banks of the Danube being charmingly diversified with woods, rocks, mountains covered with vines, fields of corn, large cities, and ruins of ancient castles. I saw the great towns of Passau and Linz, famous for the retreat of the imperial court when Vienna was besieged. This town, which has the honor of being the emperor's residence, did not at all answer my ideas of it, being much less than I expected to find it. The streets are very close and so narrow, one cannot observe the fine fronts of the palaces, though many of them very well deserve observation, being truly magnificent. They are built of fine white stone and are excessively high. For as the town is too little for the number of the people that desire to live in it, the builders seem to have projected to repair that misfortune by clapping one town on top of the other, most of the houses being 5 and some of them 6 stories. You may easily imagine that the streets being so narrow, the rooms are extremely dark, and what is an inconvenience much more intolerable, in my opinion, there is no house that has so few as 5 or 6 families in it. The apartments of the greatest ladies and even of the ministers of state are divided but by a partition from that of a tailor or shoemaker, and I know nobody that has above 2 floors in any house, one for their own use and one higher for their servants. Those that have houses of their own let out the rest of them to whoever will take them, and thus the great stairs, which are all of stone, are as common and as dirty as the street. 'Tis true, when you have once traveled through them, nothing can be more surprisingly magnificent than the apartments. They are commonly a suite of 8 or 10 large rooms, all inlaid, the doors and windows richly carved and gilt, and the furniture such as is seldom seen in the palaces of sovereign princes in other countries. Their apartments are adorned with hangings of the finest tapestry of Brussels, prodigious large looking-glasses in silver frames, fine Japan tables, beds, chairs, canopies, and window curtains of the richest Genoa damask or velvet, almost covered with gold lace or embroidery. The whole is made gay by pictures and vast jars of Japan china, and in almost every room large lustres of rock crystal. I have already had the honor of being invited to dinner by several of the first people of quality, and I must do them the justice to say the good taste and magnificence of their tables very well answered to that of their furniture. I have been more than once entertained with 50 dishes of meat, all served in silver and well dressed, the dessert proportionable, served in the finest china. But the variety and richness of their wines is what appears the most surprising. The constant way is to lay a list of their names upon the plates of the guests, along with the napkins, and I have counted several times to the number of 18 different sorts, all exquisite in their kinds. I was yesterday at Count Schönbrunn, the Vice-Chancellor's garden, when I was invited to dinner. I must own I never saw a place so perfectly delightful as the Faubourg of Vienna. It is very large and almost wholly composed of delicious palaces. If the emperor found it proper to permit the gates of the town to be laid open, that the Faubourg might be joined to it, he would have one of the largest and best-built cities in Europe. Count Schönbrunn's villa is one of the most magnificent, the furniture all rich brocades, so well fancied and fitted up, nothing can look more gay and splendid. Not to speak of a gallery full of rarities of coral, mother of pearl, etc., and throughout the whole house, a profusion of gilding, carving, fine paintings, the most beautiful porcelain statues of alabaster and ivory, and vast orange and lemon trees in gilt pots. The dinner was perfectly fine and well ordered, and made still more agreeable by the good humor of the Count. Letter 3. Prague, November 17, O.S. 1716. I hope my dear sister wants no new proofs of my sincere affection for her, but I am sure, if you do, I could not give you a stronger than writing at this time after 3 days, or more properly speaking, 3 nights and days, hard post-traveling. The Kingdom of Bohemia is the most desert of any I have seen in Germany. The villages are so poor, and the post-houses so miserable, that clean straw and fair water are blessings not to be met with, and better accommodations not to be hoped for. Though I carried my own bed with me, I could not sometimes find a place to set it up in, and I rather chose to travel all night, as cold as it is, wrapped up in my furs, than to go into the common stoves, which are filled with a mixture of all sorts of ill scents. This town was once the royal seat of the Bohemian kings, and is still the capital of the kingdom. There are yet some remains of its former splendor, being one of the largest towns in Germany, but, for the most part, old-built and thinly inhabited, which makes the houses very cheap. Those people of quality who cannot easily bear the expense of Vienna choose to reside here, where they have assemblies, music, and all other diversions, those of a court excepted, at very moderate rates, all things being here in great abundance, especially the best wild fowl I have ever tasted. I have already been visited by some of the most considerable ladies, whose relations I know at Vienna. They are dressed after the fashions there, after the manner that the people at Exeter imitate those of London. That is, their imitation is more excessive than the original. 'Tis not easy to describe what extraordinary figures they make. The person is so much lost between headdress and petticoat that they have as much occasion to write upon their backs, "This is a woman," for the information of travelers, as ever signpost painter had to write, "This is a bear." Letter 4, Vienna, January 16, O.S. 1717. I am now, dear sister, to take leave of you for a long time, and of Vienna forever, designing tomorrow to begin my journey through Hungary, in spite of the excessive cold and deep snows, which are enough to damp a greater courage than I am mistress of. But my principles of passive obedience carry me through everything. I have had my audience of leave of the Empress. His Imperial Majesty was pleased to be present when I waited on the reigning Empress, and after a very obliging conversation, both their Imperial Majesties invited me to take Vienna in my road back. But I have no thoughts of enduring over again so great a fatigue. I delivered a letter from the Duchess of Blankenberg. I stayed a few days at that court, though Her Highness pressed me very much to stay, and when I left her, engaged me to write to her. I wrote you a long letter from thence, which I hope you have received, though you don't mention it. But I believe I forgot to tell you one curiosity in all the German courts, which I cannot forbear taking notice of. All the princes keep favorite dwarfs. The emperor and empress keep 2 of these little monsters, as ugly as devils, especially the female, but they are all bedaubed with diamonds and stand at Her Majesty's elbow in all public places. The Duke of Wolfenbüttel has one, and the Duchess of Blankenberg is not without hers, but indeed the most proportionable I ever saw. I am told the King of Denmark has so far improved upon this fashion that his dwarf is his chief minister. I can assign no reason for their fondness for these pieces of deformity, but the opinion all the absolute princes have, that it is below them to converse with the rest of mankind, and, not to be quite alone, they are forced to seek their companions among the refuse of human nature, these creatures being the only part of their court privileged to talk freely to them. I am at present confined to my chamber by a sore throat, and am really glad of the excuse to avoid seeing people that I love well enough to be very much mortified when I think I am going to part with them forever. It is true, the Austrians are not commonly the most polite people in the world, nor the most agreeable, but Vienna is inhabited by all nations, and I had formed to myself a little society of such as were perfectly to my own taste. And though the number was not very great, I could never pick up in any other place such a number of reasonable, agreeable people. We were almost always together, and you know I have ever been of opinion that a chosen conversation, composed of a few that one esteems, is the greatest happiness of life. Here are some Spaniards of both sexes that have all the vivacity and generosity of sentiments anciently ascribed to their nation, and could I believe that the whole kingdom were like them, I would wish nothing more than to end my days there. The ladies of my acquaintance have so much goodness for me, they cry whenever they see me, since I have determined to undertake this journey. And indeed, I am not very easy when I reflect on what I am going to suffer. Almost everybody I see frights me with some new difficulty. Prince Eugene has been so good as to say all the things he could to persuade me to stay till the Danube is thawed, that I may have the conveniency of going by water, assuring me that the houses in Hungary are such as are no defense against the weather, and that I shall be obliged to travel 3 or 4 days between Buda and Essek without finding any house at all, through desert plains covered with snow, where the cold is so violent many have been killed by it. I own these terrors have made a very deep impression on my mind, because I believe he tells me things truly as they are, and nobody can be better informed of them. Now I have named that great man, I am sure you expect I should say something particular of him, having the advantage of seeing him very often. But I am as unwilling to speak of him at Vienna as I should be to talk of Hercules in the court of Omphale if I had seen him there. I don't know what comfort other people find in considering the weakness of great men, because perhaps it brings them nearer to their level, but 'tis always a mortification to me to observe that there is no perfection in humanity. The young Prince of Portugal is the admiration of the whole court. He is handsome and polite, with a great vivacity. All the officers tell wonders of his gallantry in the last campaign. He is lodged at court with all the honors due his rank. Adieu, dear sister. This is the last account you will have from me of Vienna. If I survive my journey, you shall hear from me again. I can say with great truth, in the words of Monesis, I have long learned to hold myself as nothing. But when I think of the fatigue my poor infant must suffer, I have all a mother's fondness in my eyes, and all her tender passions in my heart. End of Section 1. Recording by Nancy Midlin, Oakland, California.
Section 2 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amanda Mehl, Portland, Oregon. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letter 5. Peterwaradin, January 30th, O.S. 1717. At length, dear sister, I am safely arrived, with all my family in good health, at Peterwaradin, having suffered so little from the rigor of the season, against which we were well provided by furs, and found such tolerable accommodation everywhere, by the care of sending before, that I can hardly forbear laughing when I recollect all the frightful ideas that were given me of this journey. These, I see, were wholly owing to the tenderness of my Vienna friends, and their desire of keeping me with them for this winter. Perhaps it will not be disagreeable to you to give a short journal of my journey, being through a country entirely unknown to you, and very little passed, even by the Hungarians themselves, who generally choose to take the conveniency of going down the Danube. We have had the blessing of being favored with finer weather than is common at this time of the year. Though the snow was so deep, we were obliged to have our own coaches fixed upon traîneaux, which move so swift and so easily, 'tis by far the most agreeable manner of traveling post. We came to Rob, the second day from Vienna, on the 17th instant, where Mr. Wortley, sending word of our arrival to the governor, the best house in the town was provided for us, the garrison put under arms, a guard ordered at our door, and all other honors paid to us. The governor and all other officers immediately waited on Mr. Wortley to know if there was anything to be done for his service. The Bishop of Temeswar came to visit us with great civility, earnestly pressing us to dine with him next day, which we refusing, as being resolved to pursue our journey, he sent us several baskets of winter fruit, and a great variety of Hungarian wines, with a young hind just killed. This is a prelate of great power in this country, of the ancient family of Nadasti, so considerable for many ages in this kingdom. He is a very polite, agreeable, cheerful old man, wearing the Hungarian habit, with a venerable white beard down to his girdle. Rob is a strong town, well garrisoned and fortified, and was a long time the frontier town between the Turkish and German empires. It has its name from the river Rob, on which it is situated, just on its meeting with the Danube, in an open champaign country. It was first taken by the Turks, under the command of Pasha Sinan, in the reign of Sultan Amurath III, in the year 1594. The governor, being supposed to have betrayed it, was afterward beheaded by the emperor's command. The Counts of Schwarzenberg and Palffy retook it by surprise, 1598, since which time it has remained in the hands of the Germans, though the Turks once more attempted to gain it by stratagem in 1642. The cathedral is large and well built, which is all I saw remarkable in the town. Leaving Comora on the other side the river, we went the 18th to Nosmul, a small village, where, however, we made shift to find tolerable accommodation. We continued 2 days traveling between this place and Buda, through the finest plains in the world, even as if they were paved and extremely fruitful, but for the most part desert and uncultivated, laid waste by the long wars between the Turk and the Emperor, and the more cruel civil war occasioned by the barbarous persecution of the Protestant religion by the Emperor Leopold. That prince has left behind him the character of an extraordinary piety, and was naturally of a mild, merciful temper, but, putting his conscience into the hands of a Jesuit, he was more cruel and treacherous to his poor Hungarian subjects than ever the Turk has been to the Christians, breaking, without scruple, his coronation oath, and his faith, solemnly given in many public treaties. Indeed, nothing can be more melancholy than, in traveling through Hungary, to reflect on the former flourishing state of that kingdom, and to see such a noble spot of earth almost uninhabited. Such are also the present circumstances of Buda, where we arrived very early the 22nd, once the royal seat of the Hungarian kings, whose palace was reckoned one of the most beautiful buildings of the age, now wholly destroyed, no part of the town having been repaired since the last siege, but the fortifications and the castle, which is the present residence of the Governor-General Ragul, an officer of great merit. He came immediately to see us, and carried us in his coach to his house, where I was received by his lady with all possible civility, and magnificently entertained. This city is situated upon a little hill on the south side of the Danube. The castle is much higher than the town, and from it the prospect is very noble. Without the walls lie a vast number of little houses, or rather huts, that they call the Rachian town, being altogether inhabited by that people. The governor assured me it would furnish 12,000 fighting men. These towns look very odd. Their houses stand in rows, many thousands of them, so close together that they appear, at a little distance, like old-fashioned thatched tents. They consist, every one of them, of one hovel above and another underground. These are their summer and winter apartments. Buda was first taken by Solyman the Magnificent in 1526, and lost the following year to Ferdinand I, King of Bohemia. Solyman regained it by the treachery of the garrison, and voluntarily gave it into the hands of King John of Hungary, after whose death, his son being an infant, Ferdinand laid siege to it, and the Queen Mother was forced to call Solyman to her aid. He indeed raised the siege, but left a Turkish garrison in the town, and commanded her to remove her court from thence, which she was forced to submit to in 1541. It resisted afterward the sieges laid to it by the Marquis of Brandenburg in the year 1542, Count Schwarzenberg in 1598, General Rosworm in 1602, and the Duke of Lorraine, commander of the Emperor's forces, in 1684, to whom it yielded in 1686 after an obstinate defense, Abate Bassa, the governor, being killed, fighting in the breach with a Roman bravery. The loss of this town was so important, and so much resented by the Turks, that it occasioned the deposing of their emperor, Mohammed IV, the year following. We did not proceed on our journey till the 23rd, when we passed through Adam and Todovar, both considerable towns when in the hands of the Turks, but now quite ruined. The remains, however, of some Turkish towns show something of what they have been. This part of the country is very much overgrown with wood and little frequented. 'Tis incredible what vast numbers of wild fowl we saw, which often live here to a good old age, and, undisturbed by guns, in quiet sleep. We came the 25th to Mohacs, and were shown the field near it, where Louis, the young king of Hungary, lost his army and his life, being drowned in a ditch trying to fly from Balibus, general of Soliman the Magnificent. This battle opened the first passage for the Turks into the heart of Hungary. I don't name to you the little villages, of which I can say nothing remarkable, but I'll assure you I have always found a warm stove, and great plenty, particularly of wild boar, venison, and all kinds of gibier. The few people that inhabit Hungary live easily enough. They have no money, but the woods and plains afford them provision in great abundance. They were ordered to give us all things necessary, even what horses we pleased to demand, gratis. But Mr. Wortley would not oppress the poor country people by making use of this order, and always paid them to the full worth of what he had. They were so surprised at this unexpected generosity, which they are very little used to, that they always pressed upon us, at parting, a dozen of fat pheasants, or something of that sort, for a present. Their dress is very primitive, being only a plain sheepskin, and a cap and boots of the same stuff. You may easily imagine this lasts them many winters, and thus they have very little occasion for money. The 26th we passed over the frozen Danube, with all our equipage and carriages. We met on the other side General Veterani, who invited us, with great civility, to pass the night at a little castle of his a few miles off, assuring us we should have a very hard day's journey to reach Essex. This we found but too true, the woods being very dangerous and scarcely passable from the vast quantity of wolves that hoard in them. We came, however, safe, though late, to Essex, where we stayed a day to dispatch a courier with letters to the Pasha of Belgrade, and I took that opportunity of seeing the town, which is not very large, but fair built and well fortified. This was a town of great trade, very rich and populous when in the hands of the Turks. It is situated on the Drave, which runs into the Danube. The bridge was esteemed one of the most extraordinary in the world, being 8,000 paces long and all built of oak. It was burned, and the city laid in ashes by Count Leslie, 1685, but was again repaired and fortified by the Turks, who, however, abandoned it in 1687. General Dunewalt then took possession of it for the Emperor, in whose hands it has remained ever since, and is esteemed one of the bulwarks of Hungary. The 28th we went to Bokowar, a very large Rassian town, all built after the manner I have described to you. We were met there by Colonel, who would not suffer us to go anywhere but to his quarters, where I found his wife, a very agreeable Hungarian lady, and his niece and daughter, 2 pretty young women, crowded into 3 or 4 Rassian houses cast into one, and made us neat and convenient as those places are capable of being made. The Hungarian ladies are much handsomer than those of Austria. All the Vienna beauties are of that country. They are generally very fair and well-shaped, and their dress, I think, is extremely becoming. This lady was in a gown of scarlet velvet, lined and faced with sables, made exact to her shape, and the skirt falling to her feet. The sleeves are straight to their arms, and the stays buttoned before, with 2 rows of little buttons of gold, pearl, or diamonds. On their heads they wear a tassel of gold that hangs low on one side, lined with sable or some other fine fur. They gave us a handsome dinner, and I thought the conversation very polite and agreeable. They would accompany us part of our way. The 29th we arrived here, where we were met by the commanding officer, at the head of all the officers of the garrison. We are lodged in the best apartment of the governor's house, and entertained in a very splendid manner by the Emperor's order. We wait here till all points are adjusted concerning our reception on the Turkish frontiers. Mr. Wortley's courier, which he sent from Essex, returned this morning with the Pasha's answer in a purse of scarlet satin, which the interpreter here has translated. It is to promise him to be honorably received. I desired him to a point where he would be met by the Turkish convoy. He has dispatched the courier back, naming Becko, a village in the midway between Peterwaradin and Belgrade. We shall stay here till we receive his answer. Thus, dear sister, I have given you a very particular, and, I am afraid you'll think, a tedious, account of this part of my travels. It was not an affectation of showing my reading that has made me tell you some little scraps of the history of the towns I have passed through. I have always avoided anything of that kind, when I spoke of places that I believe you knew the story of as well as myself. But Hungary being a part of the world which, I believe, is quite new to you, I thought you might read with some pleasure an account of it, which I have been very solicitous to get from the best hands. However, if you don't like it, 'tis in your power to forbear reading it. I am promised to have this letter carefully sent to Vienna. Letter 6. Adrianople, April 1st, O.S. 1717. I am now got into a new world, where everything I see appears to me a change of scene, and I write to your ladyship with some content of mind, hoping, at least, that you will find the charms of novelty in my letters, and no longer reproach me that I tell you nothing extraordinary. I won't trouble you with a relation of our tedious journey, but must not omit what I saw remarkable at Sofia, one of the most beautiful towns in the Turkish Empire, and famous for its hot baths that are resorted to both for diversion and health. I stopped here one day, on purpose to see them, and designing to go incognita, I hired a Turkish coach. These voitures are not at all like ours, but much more convenient for the country, the heat being so great that glasses would be very troublesome. They are made a good deal in the manner of the Dutch stage-coaches, having wooden lattices painted and gilded, the inside being also painted with baskets and nosegays of flowers, intermixed commonly with little poetical mottos. They are covered all over with scarlet cloth, lined with silk, and very often richly embroidered and fringed. This covering entirely hides the persons in them, but may be thrown back at pleasure, and thus permits the ladies to peep through the lattices. They hold 4 people very conveniently, seated on cushions, but not raised. In one of these covered wagons I went to the bagnio about 10 o'clock. It was already full of women. It is built of stone, in the shape of a dome, with no windows but in the roof, which gives light enough. There were 5 of these domes joined together, the outmost being less than the rest, and serving only as a hall where the portress stood at the door. Ladies of quality generally give this woman a crown or 10 shillings, and I did not forget that ceremony. The next room is a very large one, paved with marble, and all around it are 2 raised sofas of marble, one above another. There were 4 fountains of cold water in this room, falling first into marble basins, and then running on the floor in little channels made for that purpose, which carried the streams into the next room, something less than this, with the same sort of marble sofas, but so hot with steams of sulphur proceeding from the baths joining to it, it was impossible to stay there with one's clothes on. The other 2 domes were the hot baths, one of which had cocks of cold water turning into it, to temper it to what degree of warmth the bathers pleased to have. I was in my traveling habit, which is a riding dress, and certainly appeared very extraordinary to them. Yet there was not one of them that showed the least surprise or impertinent curiosity, but received me with all the obliging civility possible. I know no European court where the ladies would have behaved themselves in so polite a manner to such a stranger. I believe, upon the whole, there were 200 women, and yet none of those disdainful smiles and satirical whispers that never fail in our assemblies when anybody appears that is not dressed exactly in the fashion. They repeated over and over to me, "Gouzel, pec gouzel," which is nothing but charming, very charming. The first sofas were covered with cushions and rich carpets, on which sat the ladies, and on the second their slaves behind them, but without any distinction of rank by their dress, all being in the state of nature, that is, in plain English, stark naked, without any beauty or defect concealed. Yet there was not the least wanton smile or immodest gesture among them. They walked and moved with the same majestic grace which Milton describes our General Mother with. There were many among them as exactly proportioned as ever any goddess was drawn by the pencil of a Guido or Titian, and most of their skins shiningly white, only adorned by their beautiful hair, divided into many tresses, hanging on their shoulders, braided either with pearl or ribbon, perfectly representing the figures of the Graces. I was here convinced of the truth of a reflection I have often made, that if it were the fashion to go naked, the face would be hardly observed. I perceived that the ladies of the most delicate skins and finest shapes had the greatest share of my admiration, though their faces were sometimes less beautiful than those of their companions. To tell you the truth, I had wickedness enough to wish secretly that Mr. Jervis could have been there, invisible. I fancy it would have very much improved his art to see so many fine women naked, in different postures, some in conversation, some working, others drinking coffee or sorbet, and many negligently lying on their cushions, while their slaves, generally pretty girls of 17 or 18, were employed in braiding their hair in several pretty fancies. In short, it is the women's coffee-house, where all the news of the town is told, scandal invented, etc. They generally take this diversion once a week, and stay there at least 4 or 5 hours without getting cold by immediately coming out of the hot bath into the cold room, which was very surprising to me. The lady that seemed the most considerable among them entreated me to sit by her, and would fain have undressed me for the bath. I excused myself with some difficulty. They being, however, also earnest in persuading me, I was at last forced to open my shirt and show them my stays, which satisfied them very well, for I saw they believed I was locked up in that machine, and that it was not in my own power to open it, which contrivance they attributed to my husband. I was charmed with their civility and beauty, and should have been very glad to pass more time with them. But Mr. Wortley resolving to pursue his journey next morning early, I was in haste to see the ruins of Justinian's church, which did not afford me so agreeable a prospect as I had left, being little more than a heap of stones. Adieu, madame. I am sure I have now entertained you with an account of such a sight as you never saw in your life, and what no book of travels could inform you of, as it is no less than death for a man to be found in one of these places. End of section 2. Recording by Amanda Mehl.
Section 3 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matea Bracic. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letter 7. Adrianople, April 1st, OS 1717. You see that I am very exact in keeping the promise you engaged me to make. I know not, however, whether your curiosity will be satisfied with the accounts I shall give you, though I can assure you the desire I have to oblige you to the utmost of my power has made me very diligent in my inquiries and observations. It is certain we have but very imperfect accounts of the manners and religion of these people, this part of the world being seldom visited but by merchants who mind little but their own affairs, or travellers who make too short a stay to be able to report anything exactly of their own knowledge. The Turks are too proud to converse familiarly with merchants, who can only pick up some confused informations which are generally false, and can give no better account of the ways here than a French refugee lodging in a garret in Greek Street could write of the court of England. The journey we have made from Belgrade hither cannot possibly be passed by any out of a public character. The desert woods of Servia are the common refuge of thieves who rob 50 in a company, so that we had need for all our guards to secure us. And the villages are so poor that only force could extort from them necessary provisions. Indeed, the Janissaries had no mercy on their poverty, killing all the poultry and sheep they could find, without asking to whom they belonged, while the wretched owners durst not put in their claim for fear of being beaten. Lambs just fallen, geese and turkeys big with egg, all massacred without distinction. I fancied I heard the complaints of Melibæus for the hope of his flock. When the pashas travel, it is yet worse. These oppressors are not content with eating all that is to be eaten belonging to the peasants. After they have crammed themselves and their numerous retinue, they have the impudence to exact what they call teeth money, a contribution for the use of their teeth, worn with doing them the honour of devouring their meat. This is literally and exactly true, however extravagant it may seem, and such is the natural corruption of a military government, their religion not allowing of this barbarity any more than ours does. I had the advantage of lodging 3 weeks at Belgrade with a principal effendi, that is to say, a scholar. This set of men are equally capable of preferment in the law or the church, these two sciences being cast into one, and a lawyer and a priest being the same word in the Turkish language. They are the only men really considerable in the empire. All the profitable employments and church revenues are in their hands. The Grand Signior, though general heir to his people, never presumes to touch their lands or money, which go in an uninterrupted succession to their children. It is true they lose this privilege by accepting a place at court or the title of pasha, but there are few examples of such fools among them. You may easily judge of the power of these men who have engrossed all the learning and almost all the wealth of the empire. They are the real authors, though the soldiers are the actors, of revolutions. They deposed the late Sultan Mustafa, and their power is so well known that it is the emperor's interest to flatter them. This is a long digression. I was going to tell you that an intimate daily conversation with the Effendi Ahmet Bey gave me an opportunity of knowing their religion and morals in a more particular manner than perhaps any Christian ever did. I explained to him the difference between the religion of England and Rome, and he was pleased to hear there were Christians that did not worship images or adore the Virgin Mary. The ridicule of transubstantiation appeared very strong to him. Upon comparing our creeds together, I am convinced that if our friend Doctor had free liberty of preaching here, it would be very easy to persuade the generality to Christianity, whose notions are very little different from his. Mr. Whiston would make a very good apostle here. I don't doubt but his zeal will be much fired if you communicate this account to him. But tell him he must first have the gift of tongues before he can possibly be of any use. Mohammedanism is divided into as many sects as Christianity, and the first institution is much neglected and obscured by interpretations. I cannot here forbear reflecting on the natural inclination of mankind to make mysteries and novelties. The Zaydi, Kudi, Jabari, etc., put me in mind of the Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists, and are equally zealous against one another. But the most prevailing opinion, if you search into the secret of the Effendis, is plain deism. This is indeed kept from the people, who are amused with 1,000 different notions, according to the different interests of their preachers. There are very few among them, Ahmet Bey denied there were any, so absurd as to set up for wit by declaring they believe no God at all. And Sir Paul Ryco is mistaken, as he commonly is, in calling the sect Muterin, i.e. the secret with us, atheists, they being deists, whose impiety consists of making a jest of their prophet. Ahmet Bey did not own to me that he was of this opinion, but made no scruple of deviating from some part of Mohammed's law by drinking wine with the same freedom we did. When I asked him how he came to allow himself that liberty, he made answer that all the creatures of God are good, and designed for the use of man; however, that the prohibition of wine was a very wise maxim, and meant for the common people, being the source of all disorders among them; but that the Prophet never designed to confine those that knew how to use it with moderation. Nevertheless, he said that scandal ought to be avoided, and that he never drank it in public. This is the general way of thinking among them, and very few forbear drinking wine that are able to afford it. He assured me that if I understood Arabic I should be very well pleased with reading the Alkoran, which is so far from the nonsense we charge it with, that it is the purest morality, delivered in the very best language. I have since heard impartial Christians speak of it in the same manner, and I don't doubt but that all our translations are from copies got from the Greek priests, who would not fail to falsify it with the extremity of malice. No body of men were ever more ignorant or more corrupt, yet they differ so little from the Romish Church that, I confess, nothing gives me a greater abhorrence of the cruelty of your clergy than the barbarous persecution of them whenever they have been their masters, for no other reason than their not acknowledging the Pope. The descending in that one article has got them the titles of heretics and schismatics, and, what is worse, the same treatment. I found at Philippopolis a sect of Christians that call themselves Paulines. They show an old church where, they say, St. Paul preached, and he's their favorite saint, after the manner that St. Peter is at Rome. Neither do they forget to give him the same preference over the rest of the apostles. But of all the religions I have seen, that of the Arnauts seems to me the most particular. They are natives of Arnautlik, the ancient Macedonia, and still retain the courage and hardiness, though they have lost the name of Macedonians, being the best militia in the Turkish Empire, and the only check upon the Janissaries. They are foot soldiers. We had a guard of them relieved in every considerable town we passed. They are all clothed and armed at their own expense, dressed in clean white coarse cloth, carrying guns of a prodigious length, which they run with upon their shoulders, as if they did not feel the weight of them, the leader singing a sort of rude tune, not unpleasant, and the rest making up the chorus. These people, living between Christians and Mohammedans, and not being skilled in controversy, declare that they are utterly unable to judge which religion is best, but, to be certain of not entirely rejecting the truth, they very prudently follow both. They go to the mosque on Friday and to the church on Sunday, saying for their excuse that at the day of judgment they are sure of protection from the true prophet, but which that is they are not able to determine in this world. I believe there is no other race of mankind who have so modest an opinion of their own capacity. These are remarks I have made on the diversity of religions I have seen. I don't ask your pardon for the liberty I have taken in speaking of the Roman. I know you equally condemn the quackery of all the churches as much as you revere the sacred truths, in which we both agree. You will expect I should say something to you of the antiquities of this country, but there are few remains of ancient Greece. We passed near the piece of an arch which is commonly called Trajan's Gate, from a supposition that he made it to shut up the passage over the mountains between Sophia and Philippopolis. But I rather believe it the remains of some triumphal arch, though I could not see any inscription, for if that passage had been shut up, there are many others that would serve for the march of an army, and, notwithstanding the story of Baldwin Earl of Flanders being overthrown in these straits, after he won Constantinople, I don't fancy the Germans would find themselves stopped by them at this day. It is true the road is now made, with great industry, as commodious as possible for the march of the Turkish army. There is not one ditch or puddle between this place and Belgrade that has not a large strong bridge of planks built over it. But the precipices are not so terrible as I had heard them represented. At these mountains we lay at the little village Kiskoy, wholly inhabited by Christians, as all the peasants of Bulgaria are. Their houses are nothing but little huts, raised of dirt baked in the sun, and they leave them and fly into the mountains, some months before the march of the Turkish army, who would else entirely ruin them by driving away their whole flocks. This precaution secures them a sort of plenty. For such vast tracts of land lying in common, they have the liberty of sowing what they please, and are generally very industrious husbandmen. I drank here several sorts of delicious wine. The women dress themselves in a great variety of coloured glass beads, and are not ugly, but of a tawny complexion. I have now told you all that is worth telling you, and perhaps more relating to my journey. When I am at Constantinople, I'll try to pick up some curiosities, and then you shall hear from me again. Letter 8. Adrianople, April 1st, OS 1717. I wish, dear sister, that you were as regular in letting me know what passes on your side of the globe as I am careful in endeavouring to amuse you by the account of all I see here that I think worth your notice. You content yourself with telling me over and over that the town is very dull. It may possibly be dull to you, when every day does not present you with something new, but for me, that am in areas at least 2 months' news, all that seems very stale with you would be very fresh and sweet here. Pray let me into more particulars, and I will try to awaken your gratitude by giving you a full and true relation of the novelties of this place, none of which would surprise you more than the sight of my person as I am now in my Turkish habit, though I believe you would be of my opinion that 'tis admirably becoming. I intend to send you my picture. In the meantime, accept of it here. The first part of my dress is a pair of drawers, very full, that reach to my shoes, and conceal the legs more modestly than your petticoats. They are of a thin rose-coloured damask, brocaded with silver flowers. My shoes are of white kid leather, embroidered with gold. Over this hangs my smock of a fine white silk gauze, edged with embroidery. This smock has wide sleeves hanging half-way down the arm, and is closed at the neck with a diamond button, but the shape and colour of the bosom are very well to be distinguished through it. The antary is a waistcoat made close to the shape of white and gold damask, with very long sleeves falling back, and fringed with deep gold fringe, and should have diamond or pearl buttons. My caftan, of the same stuff with my drawers, is a robe exactly fitted to my shape, and reaching to my feet, with very long straight falling sleeves. Over this is my girdle, of about 4 fingers broad, which all that can afford it have entirely of diamonds or other precious stones. Those who will not be at that expense have it of exquisite embroidery on satin, but it must be fastened before with a clasp of diamonds. The kurdie is a loose robe they throw off or put on according to the weather, being of a rich brocade, mine is green and gold, either lined with ermine or sables. The sleeves reach very little below the shoulders. The head-dress is composed of a cap called talpock, which is in winter of fine velvet embroidered with pearls or diamonds, and in summer of a light shining silver stuff. This is fixed on one side of the head, hanging a little way down with a gold tassel, and bound on either with a circle of diamonds, as I have seen several, or a rich embroidered handkerchief. On the other side of the head the hair is laid flat, and here the ladies are at liberty to show their fancies, some putting flowers, other a plume of heron's feathers, and, in short, what they please. But the most general fashion is a large bouquet of jewels, made like natural flowers, that is, the buds of pearl, the roses of different coloured rubies, the jasmines of diamonds, the jonquils of topazes, etc., so well set and enamelled, 'tis hard to imagine anything of that kind so beautiful. The hair hangs at its full length behind, divided into tresses braided with pearl or ribbon, which is always in great quantity. I never saw in my life so many fine heads of hair. In one lady's I have counted 110 of the tresses, all natural, but it must be owned that every kind of beauty is more common here than with us. 'Tis surprising to see a young woman that is not very handsome. They have naturally the most beautiful complexion in the world, and generally large black eyes. I can assure you with great truth that the court of England, though I believe it is the fairest in Christendom, does not contain so many beauties as there are under our protection here. They generally shape their eyebrows, and both Greeks and Turks have a custom of putting round their eyes a black tincture, that at a distance, or by candlelight, adds very much to the blackness of them. I fancy many of our ladies would be overjoyed to know this secret, but 'tis too visible by day. They dye their nails a rose colour, but I own I cannot enough accustom myself to this fashion to find any beauty in it. As to their morality or good conduct, I can say, like Harlequin, that 'tis just as it is with you, and the Turkish ladies don't commit one sin the less for not being Christians. Now that I am a little acquainted with their ways, I cannot forbear admiring either the exemplary discretion or extreme stupidity of all the writers that have given accounts of them. 'Tis very easy to see they have in reality more liberty than we have. No woman, of what rank soever, is permitted to go into the streets without 2 merlins, one that covers her face all but her eyes, and another that hides the whole dress of her head, and hangs half-way down her back. Their shapes are also wholly concealed by a thing they call a ferrigy, which no woman of any sort appears without. This has straight sleeves that reach to their finger ends, and it laps all around them, not unlike a riding hood. In winter 'tis of cloth, and in summer of plain stuff or silk. You may guess then how effectually this disguises them, so that there is no distinguishing the great lady from her slave. 'Tis impossible for the most jealous husband to know his wife when he meets her, and no man dare touch or follow a woman in the street. This perpetual masquerade gives them entire liberty of following their inclinations, without danger of discovery. The most usual method of intrigue is to send an appointment to the lover to meet the lady at a Jew's shop, which are as notoriously convenient as our Indian houses. And yet even those who don't make use of them do not scruple to go to buy pennyworths, and tumble over rich goods, which are chiefly to be found among that sort of people. The great ladies seldom let their gallants know who they are, and 'tis so difficult to find it out, that they can very seldom guess at her name whom they have corresponded with for above half a year together. You may easily imagine the number of faithful wives very small in a country where they have nothing to fear from a lover's indiscretion, since we see so many have the courage to expose themselves to that in this world, and all the threatened punishment of the next, which is never preached to the Turkish damsels. Neither have they much to apprehend from the resentment of their husbands, those ladies that are rich having all their money in their own hands. Upon the whole, I look upon the Turkish women as the only free people in the empire. The very divan pays respect to them, and the Grand Seignior himself, when a pasha is executed, never violates the privileges of the harem, or women's apartment, which remains unsearched and entire to the widow. They are queens of their slaves, whom the husband has no permission to so much as to look upon, except it be an old woman or two that his lady chooses. 'Tis true their law permits them 4 wives, but there is no instance of a man of quality that makes use of this liberty, or of a woman of rank that would suffer it. End of section 3.
Section 4 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amanda Mehl, Portland, Oregon. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letter 9. Adrianople, April 18th, OS 1717. I wrote to you, dear sister, and to all my other English correspondents by the last ship, and only heaven can tell when I shall have another opportunity of sending to you. But I cannot forbear to write again, though perhaps my letter may lie upon my hands these 2 months. To confess the truth, my head is so full of my entertainment yesterday that 'tis absolutely necessary for my own repose to give it some vent. Without further preface, I will then begin my story. I was invited to dine with the Grand Vizier's lady, and it was with a great deal of pleasure I prepared myself for an entertainment which was never before given to any Christian. I thought I should very little satisfy her curiosity, which I did not doubt was a considerable motive to the invitation, by going in a dress she was used to see, and therefore dressed myself in the court habit of Vienna, which is much more magnificent than ours. However, I chose to go incognita, to avoid any disputes about ceremony, and went in a Turkish coach, only attended by my woman that held up my train, and the Greek lady who was my interpretress. I was met at the court door by her black eunuch, who helped me out of the coach with great respect, and conducted me through several rooms, where her she-slaves, finely dressed, were ranged on each side. In the innermost I found the lady sitting on her sofa, in a sable vest. She advanced to meet me, and presented me 6 of her friends with great civility. She seemed a very good-looking woman, near 50 years old. I was surprised to observe so little magnificence in her house, the furniture being all very moderate, and except the habits and number of her slaves, nothing about her appeared expensive. She guessed at my thoughts, and told me she was no longer of an age to spend either her time or money in superfluities, that her whole expense was in charity, and her whole employment praying to God. There was no affectation in this speech. Both she and her husband are entirely given up to devotion. He never looks upon any other woman, and, what is much more extraordinary, touches no bribes, notwithstanding the example of all his predecessors. He is so scrupulous on this point, he would not accept Mr. Wortley's present till he had been assured over and over that it was a settled prerequisite of his place at the entrance of every ambassador. She entertained me with all kind of civility till dinner came in, which was served, 1 dish at a time, to a vast number, all finely dressed after their manner, which I don't think so bad as you have perhaps heard it represented. I'm a very good judge of their eating, having lived 3 weeks in the house of an effendi at Belgrade, who gave us very magnificent dinners dressed by his own cooks. The first week they pleased me extremely, but I own I then began to grow weary of their table, and desired our own cook might add a dish or two after our manner. But I attribute this to custom, and am very much inclined to believe that an Indian, who had never tasted of either, would prefer their cookery to ours. Their sauces are very high, all the roast very much done. They use a great deal of very rich spice. The soup is served for the last dish, and they have at least as great a variety of ragout as we have. I was very sorry I could not eat of as many as the good lady would have had me, who was very earnest in serving me of everything. The treat concluded with coffee and perfumes, which is a high mark of respect. 2 slaves, kneeling, censed my hair, clothes, and handkerchief. After this ceremony, she commanded her slaves to play and dance, which they did with their guitars in their hands, and she excused me to their want of skill, saying she took no care to accomplish them in that art. I returned her thanks, and soon after took my leave. I was conducted back in the same manner I entered, and would have gone straight to my own house, but the Greek lady with me earnestly solicited me to visit the Kiyaya's lady, saying he was the second officer in the empire, and ought indeed to be looked upon as the first, the Grand Vizier having only the name, while he exercised the authority. I had found so little diversion in the Vizier's harem that I had no mind to go into another, but her importunity prevailed with me, and I am extremely glad I was so complaisant. All things here were with quite another air than at the Grand Vizier's, and the very house confessed the difference between an old devotee and a young beauty. It was nicely clean and magnificent. I was met at the door by 2 black eunuchs, who led me through a long gallery between 2 ranks of beautiful young girls, with their hair finely plaited, almost hanging to their feet, all dressed in fine light damasks, brocaded with silver. I was sorry that decency did not permit me to stop to consider them nearer, but that thought was lost upon my entrance into a large room, or rather pavilion, built round with gilded sashes, which were most of them thrown up, and the trees planted near them gave an agreeable shade, which hindered the sun from being troublesome. The jasmines and honeysuckles that twisted round their trunks shed a soft perfume, increased by a white marble fountain playing sweet water in the lower part of the room, which fell into 3 or 4 basins with a pleasing sound. The roof was painted with all sorts of flowers, falling out of gilded baskets that seemed tumbling down. On a sofa, raised 3 steps and covered with fine Persian carpets, sat the Kiyaya's lady, leaning on cushions of white satin embroidered, and at her feet sat 2 young girls about 12 years old, lovely as angels, dressed perfectly rich, and almost covered with jewels. But they were hardly seen near the fair Fatima, for that is her name. So much her beauty effaced everything I have seen, nay, all that has been called lovely either in England or Germany. I must own that I never saw anything so gloriously beautiful, nor can I recollect a face that would have been taken notice of near hers. She stood up to receive me, saluting me after their fashion, putting her hand to her heart with a sweetness full of majesty that no court breeding could ever give. She ordered cushions to be given me, and took care to place me in the corner, which is the place of honor. I confess, though the Greek lady had before me given a great opinion of her beauty, I was so struck with admiration that I could not for some time speak to her, being wholly taken up in gazing. That surprising harmony of features, that charming result of the whole, that exact proportion of body, that lovely bloom of complexion unsullied by art, the unutterable enchantment of her smile, but her eyes, large and black with all the soft languishment of the blue, every turn of her face discovering some new grace. After my first surprise was over, I endeavored, by nicely examining her face, to find out some imperfection, without any fruit of my search but my being clearly convinced of the error of that vulgar notion that a face exactly proportioned and perfectly beautiful would not be agreeable, nature having done for her, with more success, what Apelles is said to have essayed, by a collection of the most exact features, to form a perfect face. Add to all this a behavior so full of grace and sweetness, such easy motions with an air so majestic yet free from stiffness or affectation, that I am persuaded, could she be suddenly transported upon the most polite throne of Europe, nobody would think her other than born and bred to be a queen, though educated in a country we call barbarous. To say all in a word, our most celebrated English beauties would vanish near her. When I took my leave, 2 maids brought in a fine silver basket of embroidered handkerchiefs, She begged I would wear the richest for her sake, and gave the others to my woman and her interpretress. I retired through the same ceremonies as before, and could not help thinking I had been some time in Mohammed's paradise, so much was I charmed with what I had seen. I know not how the relation of it appears to you. I wish it may give you part of my pleasure, for I would have my dear sister share in all my diversions. Letter 10. Adrianople, May 17th, O.S. I'm going to leave Adrianople, and I would not do it without giving you some account of all that is curious in it, which I have taken a great deal of pains to see. I will not trouble you with wise dissertations, whether or no this is the same city that was anciently called Orestesit or Oresti, which you know better than I do. It is now called from the Emperor Adrian, and was the first European seat of the Turkish Empire, and has been the favorite residence of many sultans. Mohammed IV and Mustafa, the brother of the reigning emperor, were so fond of it that they wholly abandoned Constantinople, which humor so far exasperated the Janissaries that it was a considerable motive to the rebellions that deposed them. Yet this man seems to love to keep his court here. I can give you no reason for this partiality. 'Tis true, the situation is fine, and the country all around very beautiful, but the air is extremely bad, and the seraglio itself is not free from the ill effect of it. The town is said to be 8 miles in compass. I suppose they reckon in the gardens. There are some good houses in it. I mean large ones, for the architecture of their palaces never makes any great show. It is now very full of people, but they are most of them such as follow the court or camp, and when they are removed, I am told 'tis no populous city. The river Maritza, anciently the Hebrus, on which it is situated, is dried up every summer, which contributes very much to make it unwholesome. It is now a very pleasant stream. There are 2 noble bridges built over it. I had the curiosity to go to see the exchange in my Turkish dress, which is disguise sufficient. Yet I own I was not very easy when I saw it crowded with Janissaries, but they dare not be rude to a woman, and made way for me with as much respect as if I had been in my own figure. It is 1/2 mile in length, the roof arched, and kept extremely neat. It holds 365 shops, furnished with all sorts of rich goods, exposed to sale in the same manner as at the New Exchange in London. But the pavement is kept much neater, and the shops are all so clean they seem just new painted. Idle people of all sorts walk here for their diversion, or amuse themselves with drinking coffee or sorbet, which is cried about as oranges and sweetmeats are in our playhouses. I observed most of the rich tradesmen were Jews. That people are in incredible power in this country. They have many privileges above all the natural Turks themselves, and have formed a very considerable commonwealth here, being judged by their own laws. They have drawn the whole trade of the empire into their hands, partly by the firm union among themselves, and partly by the idle temper and want of industry in the Turks. Every pasha has his Jew, who is his homme d'affaires. He is let into all his secrets, and does all his business. No bargain is made, no bribe received, no merchandise disposed of, but what passes through their hands. They are the physicians, the stewards, and the interpreters of all the great men. You may judge how advantageous this is to a people who never fail to make use of the smallest advantages. They have found the secret of making themselves so necessary that they are certain of the protection of the court, whatever ministry is in power. Even the English, French, and Italian merchants, who are sensible of their artifices, are, however, forced to trust their affairs to their negotiation, nothing of trade being managed without them, and the meanest among them being too important to be disobliged, since the whole body take care of his interests with as much vigor as they would those of the most considerable of their members. There are many of them vastly rich, but take care to make little public show of it, though they live in their houses in the utmost luxury and magnificence. This copious subject has drawn me from my description of the exchange, founded by Ali Pasha, whose name it bears. Near it is the Çarşı, a street of 1 mile in length, full of shops of all kinds of fine merchandise, but excessively dear, nothing being made here. It is covered on the top with boards, to keep out the rain, that merchants may meet conveniently in all kinds of weathers. The Besetin near it is another exchange, built upon pillars, where all sorts of house furniture are sold, glittering everywhere with gold, rich embroidery, and jewels. It makes a very agreeable show. From this place I went, in my Turkish coach, to the camp, which is to move in a few days to the frontiers. The Sultan is already gone to his tents, and all his court. The appearance of them is, indeed, very magnificent. Those of the great men are rather like palaces than tents, taking up a great compass of ground, and being divided into a vast number of apartments. They are all of green, and the pashas of 3 tails have those ensigns of their power placed in very conspicuous manner before their tents, which are adorned on the top with gilded balls, more or less, according to their different ranks. The ladies go in coaches to see the camp, as eagerly as ours did to that of Hyde Park, but it is very easy to observe that the soldiers do not begin the campaign with any great cheerfulness. The war is a general grievance upon the people, but particularly hard upon the tradesmen, now that the Grand Signor is resolved to lead his army in person. Every company of them is obliged, upon this occasion, to make a present according to their ability. I took the pains of rising at 6 in the morning to see the ceremony, which did not, however, begin till 8. The Grand Signor was at the seraglio window to see the procession, which passed through the principal streets. It was preceded by an effendi, mounted on a camel, richly furnished, reading aloud the Alcoran, finely bound, laid upon a cushion. He was surrounded by a parcel of boys, in white, singing some verses of it, followed by a man dressed in green boughs, representing a clean husbandman sowing seed. After him several reapers, with garlands of ears of corn, as Ceres is pictured, with scythes in their hands, seeming to mow. Then a little machine, drawn by oxen, in which was a windmill, and boys employed in grinding corn, followed by another machine, drawn by buffaloes, carrying an oven, and 2 more boys, one employed in kneading the bread, and another in drawing it out of the oven. These boys threw little cakes on both sides among the crowd, and were followed by the whole company of bakers marching on foot, 2 by 2, in their best clothes, with cakes, loaves, pastries, and pies of all sorts on their heads, and after them 2 buffoons, or jack-puddings, with their faces and clothes smeared with meal, who diverted the mob with their antic gestures. In the same manner followed all the companies of trade in the empire, the nobler sort, such as jewelers, mercers, etc., finely mounted, and many of the pageants that represent their trades, perfectly magnificent, among which that of the furriers made one of the best figures, being a very large machine set round with the skins of ermines, foxes, etc., so well stuffed that the animals seemed to be alive, and followed by music and dancers. I believe they were, upon the whole, 20,000 men, all ready to follow his highness if he commanded them. The rear was closed by the volunteers, who came to beg the honor of dying in his service. This part of the show seemed to me so barbarous that I removed from the window upon the first appearance of it. They were all naked to the middle. Some had their arms pierced through with arrows, left sticking in them. Others had them sticking in their heads, the blood trickling down their faces. Some slashed their arms with sharp knives, making the blood spring out upon those that stood there, and this is looked upon as an expression of their zeal for glory. I am told that some make use of it to advance their love, and when they are near the window where their mistress stands, all the women in town being veiled to see this spectacle, they stick another arrow for her sake, who gives some sign of approbation and encouragement to this gallantry. The whole show lasted for near 8 hours, to my great sorrow, who was heartily tired, though I was in the house of the widow of the Captain Pasha, Admiral, who refreshed me with coffee, sweetmeats, sorbet, etc., with all possible civility. I went 2 days after to see the mosque of Sultan Selim I, which is a building very well worth the curiosity of a traveler. I was dressed in my Turkish habit and admitted without scruple, though I believe they guessed who I was, by the extreme officiousness of the doorkeeper to show me every part of it. It is situated very advantageously in the midst of the city, and in the highest part of it making a very noble show. The first court has 4 gates, and the innermost 3. They are both of them surrounded with cloisters, with marble pillars of the Ionic order finely polished, and of very lively colors. The whole pavement is of white marble, and the roof of the cloisters divided into several cupolas or domes, headed with gilt balls on the top. In the midst of each court are fine fountains of white marble, and before the great gate of the mosque a portico with green marble pillars, which has 5 gates, the body of the mosque being one prodigious dome. I understand so little of architecture I dare not pretend to speak of the proportions. It seemed to me very regular. This I am sure of, it is vastly high, and I thought it the noblest building I ever saw. It has 2 rows of marble galleries on pillars with marble balusters. The pavement is also marble, covered with Persian carpets. In my opinion, it is a great addition to its beauty that it is not divided into pews and encumbered with forms and benches like our churches. nor the pillars, which are, most of them, red and white marble, disfigured by the little tawdry images and pictures that give Roman Catholic churches the air of toy shops. The walls seemed to be inlaid with such very lively colors and small flowers that I could not imagine what stones had been made use of. But going nearer, I saw that they were crusted with Japan china, which has a very beautiful effect. In the midst hung a vast lamp of silver, gilt, besides which, I do verily believe, there were at least 2,000 of a lesser size. This must look very glorious when they are all lighted. But being at night, no women are suffered to enter. Under the large lamp is a great pulpit of carved wood, gilt, and just by, a fountain to wash, which, you know, is an essential part of their devotion. In one corner is a little gallery, enclosed with gilded lattices for the Grand Signior. At the upper end, a large niche, very like an altar, raised 2 steps, covered with gold brocade, and standing before it 2 silver gilt candlesticks, the height of a man, and in them white wax candles, as thick as a man's waist. The outside of the mosque is adorned with towers, vastly high, gilt on the top, from whence the imams call the people to prayers. I had the curiosity to go up one of them, which is contrived so artfully as to give surprise to all that see it. There is but one door, which leads to 3 different staircases, going to the 3 different stories of the tower, in such a manner that 3 priests may ascend, rounding, without ever meeting each other, a contrivance very much admired. Behind the mosque is an exchange full of shops, where poor artificers are lodged gratis. I saw several dervises at their prayers here. They are dressed in a plain piece of woolen, with their arms bare, and a woolen cap on their heads, like a high-crowned hat without brims. I went to see some other mosques, built much after the same manner, but not comparable in point of magnificence to this I have described, which is infinitely beyond any church in Germany or England. I won't talk of other countries I have not seen. The Seraglio does not seem a very magnificent palace, but the gardens are very large, plentifully supplied with water and full of trees, which is all I know of them, having never been in them. I tell you nothing of the order of Mr. Wortley's entry and his audience. These things are always the same, and have been so often described I won't trouble you with the repetition. The young prince, about 11 years old, sits near his father when he gives an audience. He is a handsome boy, but probably will not immediately succeed the Sultan, there being 2 sons of Sultan Mustafa, his eldest brother remaining, the eldest about 20 years old, on whom the hopes of the people are fixed. This reign has been bloody and avaricious. I am apt to believe they are very impatient to see the end of it. P.S. I will write to you again from Constantinople. End of Section 4. Recording by Amanda Mehl, Portland, Oregon.
Section 5 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristen Edwards, Wynwood, Pennsylvania. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letter 11. Constantinople, May 29th, OS 1717. I have had the advantage of very fine weather all my journey, and as the summer is now in its beauty, I enjoyed the pleasure of fine prospects, and the meadows being full of all sorts of garden flowers and sweet herbs, my berlin perfumed the air as it pressed them. The Grand Signior furnished us with 30 covered wagons for our baggage, and 5 coaches of the country for our women. We found the road full of the great spahis and their equipage coming out of Asia to the war. They always traveled with tents, but I chose to lie in houses all the way. I will not trouble you with the names of the villages we passed, in which there was nothing remarkable. But at Çorlu there was a cognac or little seraglio, built for the use of the Grand Signior when he goes this road. I had the curiosity to view all the apartments destined for the ladies of his court. They were in the midst of a thick grove of trees made fresh by fountains, but I was most surprised to see the walls almost covered with little distiches of Turkish verse, wrote with pencils. I made my interpreter explain them to me, and I found several of them very well turned, though I easily believed him that they had lost much of their beauty in the translation. One was literally thus in English: "We come into this world, we lodge and we depart. He never goes that's lodged within my heart." The rest of our journey was through fine painted meadows by the side of the Sea of Marmora, the ancient Propontis. We lay the next night at Selivria, anciently a noble town. It is now a good seaport and neatly built enough, and has a bridge of 32 arches. Here is a famous Greek church. I had given one of my coaches to a Greek lady who desired the conveniency of traveling with me. She designed to pay her devotions, and I was glad of the opportunity of going with her. I found it an ill-built edifice, set out with the same sort of ornaments, but less rich, as the Roman Catholic churches. They showed me a saint's body where I threw a piece of money, and a picture of the Virgin Mary, drawn by the hand of St. Luke, very little to the credit of his painting. But, however, the finest Madonna of Italy is not more famous for her miracles. The Greeks have a monstrous taste in their pictures, which, for more finery, are always drawn upon a gold ground. You may imagine what a good air this has, but they have no notion either of shade or proportion. They have a bishop here who officiated in his purple robe, and sent me a candle almost as big as myself for a present when I was at my lodging. We lay that night at a town called Bujuk Çekmece, or Great Bridge, and the night following at Kujuk Çekmece, or Little Bridge, in a very pleasant lodging, formerly a monastery of dervises, having before it a large court encompassed with marble cloisters with a good fountain in the middle. The prospect from this place and the gardens round it is the most agreeable I have seen, and shows that monks of all religions know how to choose their retirements. 'Tis now belonging to a Hogja, or schoolmaster, who teaches boys here. I asked him to show me his own apartment, and was surprised to see him point to a tall cypress tree in the garden, on the top of which was a place for a bed for himself, and a little lower, one for his wife and 2 children, who slept there every night. I was so much diverted with the fancy, I resolved to examine his nest nearer, but, after going up 50 steps, I found I had still 50 to go up, and then I must climb from branch to branch with some hazard of my neck. I thought it therefore the best way to come down again. We arrived the next day at Constantinople, but I can yet tell you very little of it, all my time having been taken up with receiving visits, which are, at least, a very good entertainment to the eyes, the young women being all beauties, and their beauty highly improved by the high taste of their dress. Our palace is in Pera, which is no more a suburb of Constantinople than Westminster is a suburb to London. All the ambassadors are lodged very near each other. One part of our house shows us the port, the city, and the seraglio, and the distant hills of Asia, perhaps altogether the most beautiful prospect in the world. A certain French author says, Constantinople is twice as big as Paris. Mr. Wortley is unwilling to own it is bigger than London, though I confess it appears to me to be so, but I don't believe it is so populous. The burying fields about it are certainly much larger than the whole city. It is surprising what a vast deal of land is lost this way in Turkey. Sometimes I have seen burying places of several miles, belonging to very inconsiderable villages, which were formerly great towns, and retain no other mark of their ancient grandeur than this dismal one. On no occasion do they ever remove a stone that serves for a monument. Some of them are costly enough, being of very fine marble. They set up a pillar with a carved turban on the top of it to the memory of a man, and, as the turbans by their different shapes show the quality or profession, 'tis in a manner putting up the arms of the deceased. Besides, the pillar commonly bears an inscription in gold letters. The ladies have a simple pillar, without other ornament, except those that die unmarried, who have a rose on the top of their monument. The sepulchres of particular families are railed in and planted round with trees. Those of the sultans and some great men have lamps constantly burning in them. When I spoke of their religion, I forgot to mention 2 peculiarities, one of which I have read of, but it seemed so odd to me I could not believe it. Yet 'tis certainly true, that when a man has divorced his wife in the most solemn manner, he can take her again, upon no other terms than permitting another man to pass a night with her, and there are some examples of those who have submitted to this law rather than not have back their beloved. The other point of doctrine is very extraordinary. Any woman that dies unmarried is looked upon to die in a state of reprobation. To confirm this belief, they reason that the end of the creation of woman is to increase and multiply, and that she is only properly employed in the works of her calling when she is bringing forth children or taking care of them, which are all the virtues that God expects from her. And indeed, their way of life, which shuts them out of all public commerce, does not permit them any other. Our vulgar notion that they don't own women to have any souls is a mistake. 'Tis true they say they are not of so elevated a kind, and therefore must not hope to be admitted into the paradise appointed for the men, who are to be entertained by celestial beauties. But there is a place of happiness destined for souls of the inferior order, where all good women are to be in eternal bliss. Many of them are very superstitious and will not remain widows 10 days for fear of dying in the reprobate state of an useless creature. But those that like their liberty and are not slaves to their religion content themselves with marrying when they are afraid of dying. This is a piece of theology very different from that which teaches nothing to be more acceptable to God than a vow of perpetual virginity. Which divinity is most rational, I leave to you to determine. I have already made some progress in a collection of Greek medals. Here are several professed antiquaries who are ready to serve anybody that desires them, but you cannot imagine how they stare in my face when I inquire about them, as if nobody was permitted to seek after medals till they were grown a piece of antiquity themselves. I have got some very valuable ones of the Macedonian kings, particularly one of Perseus, so lively I fancy I can see all his ill qualities in his face. I have a porphyry head finely cut of the true Greek sculpture, but who it represents is to be guessed at by the learned when I return. For you are not to suppose these antiquaries, who are all Greeks, know anything. Their trade is only to sell. They have correspondents at Aleppo, Grand Cairo in Arabia, and Palestine, who send them all they can find, and very often great heaps that are only fit to melt into pans and kettles. They get the best price they can for them, without knowing those that are valuable from those that are not. Those that pretend to skill generally find out the image of some saint in the medals of the Greek cities. One of them, showing me the figure of a Palais, with a victory in her hand on a reverse, assured me it was the Virgin holding a crucifix. The same man offered me the head of a Socrates on a sardonyx, and, to enhance the value, gave him the title of St. Augustine. I have bespoken a mummy, which I hope will come safe to my hands, notwithstanding the misfortune that befell a very fine one designed for the King of Sweden. He gave a great price for it, and the Turks took it into their heads that he must have some considerable project depending on it. They fancied it the body of God knows who, and that the state of their empire mystically depended on the conservation of it. Some old prophecies were remembered upon this occasion, and the mummy was committed prisoner to the 7 Towers, where it has remained under close confinement ever since. I dare not try my interest in so considerable a point as the release of it, but I hope mine will pass without examination. Letter 12, Belgrade Village, June 17th, O.S. I heartily beg your ladyship's pardon, but I really could not forbear laughing heartily at your letter, and the commissions you are pleased to honor me with. You desire me to buy you a Greek slave, who is to be mistress of 1,000 good qualities. The Greeks are subjects and not slaves. Those who are to be bought in that manner are either such as are taken in war, or stolen by the Tartars from Russia, Circassia, or Georgia, and are such miserable, awkward, poor wretches, you would not think any of them worthy to be your housemaids. 'Tis true that many thousands were taken in the Morea, but they have been, most of them, redeemed by the charitable contributions of the Christians, or ransomed by their own relations at Venice. The fine slaves that wait upon the great ladies, or serve the pleasures of the great men, are all bought at the age of 8 or 9 years old, and educated with great care to accomplish them in singing, dancing, embroidery, etc. They are commonly Circassians, and their patron never sells them, except it is as a punishment for some very great fault. If ever they grow weary of them, they either present them to a friend or give them their freedom. Those that are exposed to sale at the markets are always either guilty of some crime or so entirely worthless that they are of no use at all. I am afraid you will doubt the truth of this account, which I own is very different from our common notions in England, but it is no less truth for all that. Your whole letter is full of mistakes from one end to the other. I see you have taken your ideas of Turkey from that worthy author Dumont, who has wrote with equal ignorance and confidence. 'Tis a particular pleasure to me here to read the voyages to the Levant, which are generally so far removed from truth and so full of absurdities, I am very well diverted with them. They never fail giving you an account of the women whom 'tis certain they never saw, and talking very wisely of the genius of the men, into whose company they are never admitted, and very often describe mosques which they dare not even peep into. The Turks are very proud, and will not converse with a stranger they are not assured is considerable in his own country. I speak of the men of distinction, for, as to the ordinary fellows, you may imagine what ideas their conversation can give of the general genius of the people. As to the balm of Mecca, I will certainly send you some, but it is not so easily got as you suppose it, and I cannot, in conscience, advise you to make use of it. I know not how it comes to have such universal applause. All the ladies of my acquaintance at London and Vienna have begged me to send pots of it to them. I have had a present of a small quantity, which I'll assure you is very valuable, of the best sort, and with great joy applied it to my face, expecting some wonderful effect to my advantage. The next morning the change indeed was wonderful. My face was swelled to a very extraordinary size, and all over as red as my Lady H's. It remained in this lamentable state 3 days, during which you may be sure I passed my time very ill. I believed it would never be otherwise, and, to add to my mortification, Mr. Wortley reproached my indiscretion without ceasing. However, my face is since in status quo. Nay, I am told by the ladies here that it is much mended by the operation, which, I confess, I cannot perceive in my looking-glass. Indeed, if one were to form an opinion of this balm from their faces, one should think very well of it. They all make use of it and have the loveliest bloom in the world. For my part, I never intend to endure the pain of it again. Let my complexion take its natural course and decay in its own due time. I have very little esteem for medicines of this nature. But do as you please, madam. Only remember, before you use it, that your face will not be such as you will care to show in the drawing-room for some days after. Letter 13. Pera, March 10th, O.S. 1717. I have not written to you, dear sister, these many months, a great piece of self-denial, but I know not where to direct, or what part of the world you are in. I have received no letter from you since that short note of April last, in which you tell me that you are on the point of leaving England and promise me a direction for the place you stay in. But I have in vain expected it till now. And now I only learn from the Gazette that you are returned, which induces me to venture this letter to your house at London. I had rather 10 of my letters should be lost than you imagine I don't write, and I think it is hard fortune if 1 in 10 don't reach you. However, I am resolved to keep the copies as testimonies of my inclination to give you, to the utmost of my power, all the diverting parts of my travels, while you are exempt from all the fatigues and inconveniences. In the first place, then, I wish you joy of your niece, for I was brought to bed of a daughter 5 weeks ago. I don't mention this as one of my diverting adventures, though I must own that it is not half so mortifying here as in England. there being as much difference as there is between a little cold in the head, which sometimes happens here, and the consumption cough so common in London. Nobody keeps their house a month for laying in, and I am not so fond of any of our customs as to retain them when they are not necessary. I returned my visits at 3 weeks' end, and about 4 days ago crossed the sea which divides this place from Constantinople to make a new one, where I had the good fortune to pick up many curiosities. I went to see the Sultana Haifaten, favorite of the late Emperor Mustafa, who, you know, or perhaps you don't know, was deposed by his brother, the reigning sultan, and died a few weeks after, being poisoned, as it was generally believed. This lady was, immediately after his death, saluted with an absolute order to leave the seraglio and choose herself a husband among the great men at the port. I suppose you may imagine her overjoyed at this proposal. Quite the contrary. These women who are called and esteem themselves queen look upon this liberty as the greatest disgrace and affront that can happen to them. She threw herself at the Sultan's feet and begged him to poignard her rather than use his brother's widow with contempt. She represented to him, in agonies of sorrow, that she was privileged from this misfortune by having brought 5 princes into the Ottoman family. But all the boys being dead and only one girl surviving, this excuse was not received, and she was compelled to make her choice. She chose Bekir Effendi, then Secretary of State, and above 80 years old, to convince the world that she firmly intended to keep the vow she had made of never suffering a second husband to approach her bed. And since she must honor some subject so far as to be called his wife, she would choose him as a mark of her gratitude, since it was he that had presented her at the age of 10 years to her last lord. But she never permitted him to pay her one visit, though it is now 15 years she has been in his house, where she passes her time in uninterrupted mourning, with a constancy very little known in Christendom, especially in a widow of 21, for she is now but 36. She has no black eunuchs for her guard, her husband being obliged to respect her as a queen, and not to inquire at all into what is done in her apartment. I was led into a large room with a sofa the whole length of it, adorned with white marble pillars like a ruelle, covered with pale blue figured velvet on a silver ground, with cushions of the same, where I was desired to repose until the Sultana appeared, who had contrived this manner of reception to avoid rising up at my entrance, though she made me an inclination of her head when I rose up to her. I was very glad to observe a lady that had been distinguished by the favor of an emperor, to whom beauties were every day presented from all parts of the world. But she did not seem to me to have ever been half so beautiful as the fair Fatima I saw at Adrianople, though she had the remains of a fine face, more decayed by sorrow than time. But her dress was something so surprisingly rich that I cannot forbear describing it to you. She wore a vest called donna lama, which differs from a kaftan by longer sleeves and folding over at the bottom. It was of purple cloth, straight to her shape and thick set on each side, down to her feet and round the sleeves, with pearls of the best water of the same size as their buttons commonly are. You must not suppose that I mean as large as those of my lord, but about the bigness of a pea, and to these buttons large loops of diamonds in the form of those gold loops so common on birthday coats. This habit was tied at the waist with 2 large tassels of smaller pearls, and round the arms embroidered with large diamonds. Her shift was fastened at the bottom with a great diamond, shaped like a lozenge. Her girdle as broad as the broadest English ribbon, entirely covered with diamonds. Round her neck she wore 3 chains which reached to her knees, one of large pearl, at the bottom of which hung a fine-colored emerald as big as a turkey egg, another consisting of 200 emeralds closely joined together, of the most lively green, perfectly matched, every one as large as a half-crown piece and as thick as 3 crown pieces, and another of small emeralds perfectly round, but her earrings eclipsed all the rest. They were 2 diamonds shaped exactly like pears, as large as a big hazelnut. Round her colpack she had 4 strings of pearl, the whitest and the most perfect in the world, at least enough to make 4 necklaces, every one as large as the Duchess of Marlborough's, and of the same shape, fastened with 2 roses, consisting of a large ruby for the middle stone, and round them 20 drops of clean diamonds to each. Besides this, her headdress was covered with bodkins of emeralds and diamonds. She wore large diamond bracelets and had 5 rings on her fingers, except Mr. Pitt's, the largest I ever saw in my life. It is for jewelers to compute the value of these things, but according to the common estimation of jewels in our part of the world, her whole dress must be worth 100,000 pounds sterling. This I am sure of, that no European queen has half the quantity, and the Empress's jewels, though very fine, would look very mean near hers. She gave me a dinner of 50 dishes of meat, which, after their fashion, were placed on the table but one at a time, and was extremely tedious. But the magnificence of her table answered very well to that of her dress. The knives were of gold, and the hafts set with diamonds. But the piece of luxury which grieved my eyes was the tablecloth and napkins, which are all Tiffany, embroidered with silk and gold in the finest manner, in natural flowers. It was with the utmost regret that I made use of these costly napkins, which were as finely wrought as the finest handkerchiefs that ever came out of this country. You may be sure that they were entirely spoiled before dinner was over. The sherbet, which is the liquor they drink at meals, was served in china bowls, but the covers and salvers massy gold. After dinner, water was brought in gold basins, and towels of the same kind with the napkins, which I very unwillingly wiped my hands upon, and coffee was served in china, with gold suku. The Sultana seemed in very good humor, and talked to me with the utmost civility. I did not omit this opportunity of learning all that I possibly could of the seraglio, which is so entirely unknown among us. She assured me that the story of the Sultan's throwing a handkerchief is altogether fabulous, and the manner upon that occasion no other than this. He sends the Kaislar Aga to signify to the lady the honor he intends her. She is immediately complimented upon it by the others, and led to the bath, where she is perfumed and dressed in the most magnificent and becoming manner. The emperor precedes his visit by a royal present, and then comes into her apartment. Neither is there any such thing as her creeping in at the bed's foot. She said that the first he made choice of was always afterward the first in rank, and not the mother of the eldest son, as other writers would make us believe. Sometimes the Sultan diverts himself in the company of all his ladies, who stand in a circle round him, and she confessed they were ready to die with envy and jealousy of the happy she that he distinguished by any appearance of preference. But this seemed to me neither better nor worse than the circles in most courts, where the glance of the monarch is watched and every smile is waited for with impatience and envied by those who cannot obtain it. She never mentioned the Sultan without tears in her eyes, yet she seemed very fond of the discourse. My past happiness, said she, appears a dream to me, yet I cannot forget that I was beloved by the greatest and most lovely of mankind. I was chosen from all the rest to make all his campaigns with him, and I would not survive him if I was not passionately fond of the princess my daughter. Yet all my tenderness for her was hardly enough to make me preserve my life. When I left him, I passed a whole 12 months without seeing the light. Time hath softened my despair, yet I now pass some days every week in tears, devoted to the memory of my Sultan. There was no affectation in these words. It was easy to see she was in a deep melancholy, though her good humor made her willing to divert me. She asked me to walk in her garden, and one of her slaves immediately brought her a pellice of rich brocade lined with sables. I waited on her into the garden, which had nothing in it remarkable but the fountains, and from thence she showed me all her apartments. In her bedchamber her toilet was displayed, consisting of 2 looking-glasses, the frames covered with pearls, and her night talpoche set with bodkins of jewels, and near it 3 vests of fine sables, every one of which is, at least, worth $1,000, 200 pounds English money. I don't doubt but these rich habits were purposely placed in sight, though they seemed negligently thrown on the sofa. When I took my leave of her, I was complimented with perfumes, as at the Grand Vizier's, and presented with a very fine embroidered handkerchief. Her slaves were to the number of 30, besides 10 little ones, the oldest not above 7 years old. These were the most beautiful girls I ever saw, all richly dressed, and I observed that the Sultana took a great deal of pleasure in these lovely children, which is a vast expense, for there is not a handsome girl of that age to be bought under 100 pounds sterling. They wore little garlands of flowers and their own hair, braided, which was all their headdress, but their habits were all of gold stuffs. These served her coffee, kneeling, brought water when she washed, etc. It is a great part of the work of the elder slaves to take care of these young girls, to learn them to embroider, and to serve them as carefully as if they were children of the family. Now do you imagine I have entertained you all this while with a relation that has at least received many embellishments from my hand? This, you will say, is but too like the Arabian tales, these embroidered napkins, and a jewel as large as a turkey's egg. You forget, dear sister, those very tales were written by the author of this country, and, excepting the enchantments, are a real representation of the manners here. We travelers are in very hard circumstances. If we say nothing but what has to be said before us, we are dull and we have observed nothing. If we tell anything new, we are laughed at as fabulous and romantic, not allowing either for the difference of ranks, which affords difference of company, or more curiosity, or the change of customs that happen every 20 years in every country. But the truth is, people judge of travelers exactly with the same candor, good nature, and impartiality they judge of their neighbors upon all occasions. For my part, if I live to return among you, I am so well acquainted with the morals of all my dear friends and acquaintances that I am resolved to tell them nothing at all, to avoid the imputation which their charity would certainly incline them to, of my telling too much. But I depend upon your knowing me enough to believe whatever I seriously assert for truth, though I give you leave to be surprised at an account so new to you. But what would you say if I told you I had been in a harem, where the winter apartment was wainscoted with inlaid work of mother of pearl, ivory of different colors, and olive wood, exactly like the little boxes you have seen brought out of this country, and in whose rooms designed for summer the walls are all crusted with Japan china, the roofs gilt, and the floors spread with the finest Persian carpets? Yet there is nothing more true. Such is the palace of my lovely friend, the fair Fatima, whom I was acquainted with at Adrianople. I went to visit her yesterday, and if possible, she appeared to me handsomer than before. She met me at the door of her chamber, and giving me her hand with the best grace in the world, "You Christian ladies," said she, with a smile that made her as beautiful as an angel, "have the reputation of inconsistency, and I did not expect, whatever goodness you expressed for me at Adrianople, that I should ever see you again. But I am now convinced that I have really the happiness of pleasing you, and, if you knew how I speak of you among our ladies, you would be assured that you do me justice in making me your friend." She placed me in the corner of the sofa, and I spent the afternoon in her conversation with the greatest pleasure in the world. End of section 5.
Section 6 of the Turkish Embassy Letters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. The Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Letter 14. Pera, March the 16th, O.S. 1717. I am extremely pleased, my dear lady, that you have at length found a commission for me that I can answer without disappointing your expectations, though I must tell you that it is not so easy as perhaps you think it, and that if my curiosity had not been more diligent than any other stranger's has ever yet been, I must have answered you with an excuse, as I was forced to do when you desired me to buy you a Greek slave. I have got for you, as you desire, a Turkish love letter, which I have put in a little box, and ordered the captain of the Smyrniote to deliver it to you with this letter. The translation of it is literally as follows. The first piece you should pull out of the purse is a little pearl, which is in Turkish called ingi, and must be understood in this manner. Ingi, sensin güzelen gingi, pearl, fairest of the young. Karafil, karamfilsin karan yok, konge gulsum timarin yok, ben seni çok than severim, senin benden haberin yok. Clove, you are as slender as the clove, you are an unblown rose. I have long loved you, and you have not known it. Pul, derdime derman, bul. Jonquil, have pity on my passion. Kihat, bilerum sahat sahat. Paper, I faint every hour. Ermus, ver bixa ber umut. Pear, give me some hope. Dahun, derdinen oldum zabun. Soap, I am sick with love. Kemur, ben olium sise umur. Coal, may I die, and all my years be yours. Gul, ben aglarum sen gul. A rose, may you be pleased, and your sorrows mine. Hasir, olim sana zazir. A straw, suffer me to be your slave. Yoho, ustune bulunmaz pahu. Cloth, your price is not to be found. Tatsin, sengel ben, chekim senin hatsin. Cinnamon, but my fortune is yours. Giro, esking ilen oldum hira. A match, I burn, my flame consumes me. Sirma, uzunu benden agirma. Gold thread, don't turn away your face from me. Such, basmazum touch. Hair, crown of my head. Uzum, benin iki guzum. Grape, my two eyes. Till, ulgorum tezkel. Gold wire, I die, come quickly. And, by way of postscript, Weber, Bisa beer dogmum haber. Pepper, send me an answer. You see, this letter is all in verse, and I can assure you there is as much fancy shown in the choice of them as in the most studied expressions of our letters, there being, I believe, 1,000,000 of verses designed for this use. There is no colour, no flower, no weed, no fruit, herb, pebble, or feather that has not a verse belonging to it. And you may quarrel, reproach, or send letters of passion, friendship, or civility, or even of news, without ever inking your fingers. I fancy you are now wondering at my profound learning, but alas, dear madam, I am almost fallen into the misfortune so common to the ambitious. While they are employed on distant, insignificant conquests abroad, a rebellion starts up at home. I am in great danger of losing my English. I find 'tis not half so easy to me to write in it as it was a 12-month ago. I am forced to study for expression, and must leave off all other languages and try to learn my mother tongue. Human understanding is as much limited as human power or human strength. The memory can retain but a certain number of images, and 'tis as impossible for one human creature to be perfect master of 10 different languages as to have in perfect subjection 10 different kingdoms, or to fight against 10 men at a time. I am afraid I shall at last know none as I should do. I live in a place that very well represents the Tower of Babel. In Pera they speak Turkish, Greek, Hebrew, Armenian, Arabic, Persian, Russian, Sclavonian, Wallachian, German, Dutch, French, English, Italian, Hungarian. And what is worse, there are 10 of these languages spoken in my own family. My grooms are Arabs, my footmen French, English, and Germans, my nurse an Armenian, my housemaids Russians, half a dozen other servants Greeks, my steward an Italian, my janissaries Turks, so that I live in the perpetual hearing of this medley of sounds, which produces a very extraordinary effect upon the people that are born here, for they learn all these languages at the same time, and without knowing any of them well enough to write or read in it. There are very few men, women, or even children here that have not the same compass of words in 5 or 6 of them. I know myself of several infants of 3 or 4 years old that speak Italian, French, Greek, Turkish, and Russian, which last they learn of their nurses, who are generally of that country. This seems almost incredible to you, and is, in my mind, one of the most curious things in this country, and takes off very much from the merit of our ladies, who set up for such extraordinary geniuses upon the credit of some superficial knowledge of French and Italian. As I prefer English to all the rest, I am extremely mortified at the daily decay of it in my head, where I'll assure you, with grief of heart, it is reduced to such a small number of words, I cannot recollect any tolerable phrase to conclude my letter with, and am forced to tell your ladyship, very bluntly, that I am yours, etc. Letter 15. Tunis, July the 31st, O.S. 1718. I left Constantinople the 6th of the last month, and this is the first post from whence I could send a letter, though I have often wished for the opportunity, that I might impart some of the pleasure I found in this voyage through the most agreeable part of the world, where every scene presents me some poetical idea. Warmed with poetic transport I survey the immortal islands and the well-known sea, for here so oft the muse her harp has strung, that not a mountain rears its head unsung. I beg your pardon for this sally, and will, if I can, continue the rest of my account in plain prose. The second day after we set sail, we passed Gallipolis, a fair city, situated in the bay of Chersonesus, and much respected by the Turks, being the first town they took in Europe. At 5 the next morning we anchored in the Hellespont, between the castles of Sestos and Abydos, now called the Dardanelli. These are now 2 little ancient castles, but of no strength, being commanded by a rising ground behind them, which I confess I should never have taken notice of, if I had not heard it observed by our captain and officers, my imagination being wholly employed by the tragic story that you are well acquainted with. The swimming lover and the knightly bride, how Hero loved, and how Leander died. Verse again! I am certainly infected by the poetical air I have passed through. That of Abydos is undoubtedly very amorous, since that soft passion betrayed the castle into the hands of the Turks, who besieged it in the reign of Orcanes. The governor's daughter, imagining to have seen her future husband in a dream, though I don't find she had either slept upon bride cake or kept St. Agnes fast, fancied she saw the dear figure in the form of one of her besiegers, and, being willing to obey her destiny, tossed a note to him over the wall with the offer of her person and the delivery of the castle. He showed it to his general, who consented to try the sincerity of her intentions and withdrew his army, ordering the young man to return with a select body of men at midnight. She admitted him at the appointed hour. He destroyed the garrison, took the father prisoner, and made her his wife. This town is in Asia, first founded by the Milesians. Sestos is in Europe and was once the principal city of Chersonesus. Since I have seen this strait, I find nothing improbable in the adventure of Leander, or very wonderful in the bridge of boats of Xerxes. 'Tis so narrow, 'tis not surprising a young lover should attempt to swim, or an ambitious king try to pass his army over it. But then, 'tis so subject to storms, 'tis no wonder the lover perished, and the bridge was broken. From hence we had a full view of Mount Ida, where Juno once caressed her amorous Jove, and the world's master lay subdued by love. Not many leagues sail from hence, I saw the point of land where poor old Hecuba was buried, and about a league from that place is Cape Janissary, the famous promontory of Sigeum, where we anchored. My curiosity supplied me with strength to climb to the top of it, to see the place where Achilles was buried, and where Alexander ran naked round his tomb in honour of him, which no doubt was a great comfort to his ghost. I saw there the ruins of a very large city, and found a stone on which Mr. Wortley plainly distinguished the words of Sigai Anpolin. We ordered this on board the ship, but were showed others much more curious by a Greek priest, though a very ignorant fellow, that could give no tolerable account of anything. On each side the door of this little church lie 2 large stones, about 10 feet long each, 5 in breadth and 3 in thickness. That on the right is a very fine white marble, the side of it beautifully carved in bas relief. It represents a woman who seems to be designed for some deity, sitting on a chair with a footstool, and before her another woman weeping, and presenting to her a young child that she has in her arms, followed by a procession of women with children in the same manner. This is certainly part of a very ancient tomb, but I dare not pretend to give the true explanation of it. On the stone on the left side is a very fair inscription, but the Greek is too ancient for Mr. Wortley's interpretation. I am very sorry not to have the original in my possession, which might have been purchased of the poor inhabitants for a small sum of money. But our captain assured us that without having machines made on purpose, 'twas impossible to bear it to the seaside, and, when it was there, his long-boat would not be large enough to hold it. The ruins of this great city are now inhabited by poor Greek peasants, who wear the scioti habit, the women being in short petticoats, fastened by straps round their shoulders, and large smock sleeves of white linen, with neat shoes and stockings, and on their heads a large piece of muslin, which falls in large folds on their shoulders. One of my countrymen, Mr. Sands, whose book I doubt not you have read, as one of the best of its kind, speaking of these ruins, supposes them to have been the foundation of a city begun by Constantine, before his building Byzantium, but I see no good reason for that imagination, and am apt to believe them much more ancient. We saw very plainly from this promontory the river Simois, rolling from Mount Ida and running through a very spacious valley. It is now a considerable river, and is called Simores. It is joined in the vale by the Scamander, which appeared a small stream half choked with mud, but is perhaps large in the winter. This was Xanthus among the gods, as Homer tells us, and 'tis by that heavenly name the nymph Oene invokes it in her epistle to Paris. The Trojan virgins used to offer their first favours to it by the name of Scamander, till the adventure which Monsieur de la Fontaine has told so agreeably abolished that heathenish ceremony. When the stream is mingled with the Simois, they run together to the sea. All that is left now of Troy is the ground on which it stood, for, I am firmly persuaded, whatever pieces of antiquity may be found round it are much more modern, and I think Strabo says the same thing. However, there is some pleasure in seeing the valley where I imagined the famous duel of Menelaus and Paris had been fought, and where the greatest city in the world was situated. 'Tis certainly the noblest situation that can be found for the head of a great empire, much to be preferred to that of Constantinople, the harbour here being always convenient for ships from all parts of the world, and that of Constantinople inaccessible almost 6 months in the year, while the north wind reigns. North of the promontory of Sigium, we saw that of Ratium, famed for the sepulchre of Ajax. While I viewed these celebrated fields and rivers, I admired the exact geography of Homer, whom I had in my hand. Almost every epithet he gives to a mountain or plain is still just for it, and I spent several hours here in as agreeable cogitations as ever Don Quixote had on Mount Montesinos. We sailed next night to the shore, where 'tis vulgarly reported Troy stood, and I took the pains of rising at 2 in the morning to view coolly those ruins which are commonly showed to strangers, and which the Turks called Eski Stambul, i.e. Old Constantinople. For that reason, as well as some others, I conjecture them to be the remains of that city begun by Constantine. I hired an ass, the only voiture to be had here, that I might go some miles into the country and take a tour round the ancient walls, which are of a vast extent. We found the remains of a castle on a hill, and of another in a valley, several broken pillars, and 2 pedestals, from which I took those Latin inscriptions. 1. Divi aug col, et col igul Philippensis, eorundum principum, col, iul, Parianae, tribune, milit, co, 32, voluntar, trib, milit, leg, 13, gem, prefecto equit, ale L, scubulorum, vic, 8. 2. Divi iul Flamini, C. Antonio, M.F. Bolt, Rufo, Flamin, div aug col apprens, et col iul Philippensis, eorundum et princip, item col iul Parianae trib, milit co 32, voluntario, trib milit 13, gem pref equit ale I scubulorum vic 7. I do not doubt but the remains of a temple near this place are the ruins of one dedicated to Augustus, and I know not why Mr. Sands calls it a Christian temple, since the Romans certainly built hereabouts. Here are many tombs of fine marble and vast pieces of granite, which are daily lessened by the prodigious balls that the Turks make from them for their cannon. We passed that evening the Isle of Tenedos, once under the patronage of Apollo, as he gave it in himself in the particulars of his estate, when he courted Daphne. It is but 10 miles in circuit, but in those days very rich and well peopled, still famous for its excellent wine. I say nothing of Tennis, from whom it was called, but naming Mytilene, where we passed next, I cannot forbear mentioning Lesbos, where Sappho sung, and Pittacus reigned, famous for the birth of Alcaeus, Theophrastus, and Arion, those masters in poetry, philosophy, and music. This was one of the last islands that remained in the Christian dominion after the conquest of Constantinople by the Turks. But need I talk to you of Cantacuzeni, etc., princes that you are as well acquainted with as I am? 'Twas with regret I saw us sail from this island into the Aegean Sea, now the archipelago, leaving Schio, the ancient Chios, on the left, which is the richest and most populous of these islands, fruitful in cotton, corn, and silk, planted with groves of orange and lemon trees, and the Arvesian mountain, still celebrated for the nectar that Virgil mentions. Here is the best manufacture of silks in all Turkey. The town is well built, the women famous for their beauty, and show their faces as in Christendom. There are many rich families, though they confine their magnificence to the inside of their houses, to avoid the jealousy of the Turks, who have a pasha here. However, they enjoy a reasonable liberty, and indulge the genius of their country, and eat and sing and dance away their time, fresh as their groves and happy as their clime. Their chains hang lightly on them, though 'tis not long since they were imposed, not being under the Turk till 1566. But perhaps 'tis as easy to obey the Grand Signor as the state of Genoa, to whom they were sold by the Greek emperor. But I forget myself in these historical touches, which are very impertinent when I write to you. Passing the strait between the islands of Andros and Achaia, now Libadia, we saw the promontory of Sunium, now called Cape Colonna, where are yet standing the vast pillars of a temple of Minerva. This venerable sight made me think, with double regret, on a beautiful temple of Theseus, which, I am assured, was almost entire at Athens till the last campaign in the Morea, that the Turks filled it with powder, and it was accidentally blown up. You may believe I had a great mind to land on the famed Peloponnesus, though it were only to look on the rivers of Aesopus, Peneus, Inachus, and Eurotas, the fields of Arcadia, and other scenes of ancient mythology. But instead of demigods and heroes, I was credibly informed 'tis now overrun by robbers, and that I should run a great risk of falling into their hands by undertaking such a journey through a desert country, for which, however, I have so much respect that I have much ado to hinder myself from troubling you with its whole history, from the foundation of Nicaea and Corinth to the last campaign there. But I check the inclination as I did that of landing. We sailed quietly by Cape Angelo, once Malea, where I saw no remains of the famous temple of Apollo. We came that evening in sight of Candia. It is very mountainous. We easily distinguished that of Ida. We have Virgil's authority that here were 100 cities. Centum urbes habitant magnas. The chief of them, the scene of monstrous passions. Metellus first conquered this birthplace of his Jupiter. It fell afterward into the hands of... I am running on to the very siege of Candia, and I am so angry with myself that I will pass by all the other islands with this general reflection, that 'tis impossible to imagine anything more agreeable than this journey would have been 2,000 or 3,000 years since, when, after drinking a dish of tea with Sappho, I might have gone the same evening to visit the temple of Homer in Chios, and passed this very voyage in taking plans of magnificent temples, delineating the miracles of statuaries, and conversing with the most polite and most gay of mankind. Alas, art is extinct here, the wonders of nature alone remain, and it was with vast pleasure I observed those of Mount Etna, whose flame appears very bright in the night, many leagues off at sea, and fills the head with 1,000 conjectures. However, I honour philosophy too much to imagine it could turn that of Empedocles, and Lucian shall never make me believe such a scandal of a man, of whom Lucretius says, Vix humana videtur stirpe creatus. We passed Trinacria without hearing any of the sirens that Homer describes, and being thrown on neither Scylla nor Charybdis, came safe to Malta, first called Melita, from the abundance of honey. It is a whole rock covered with very little earth. The Grand Master lives here in the state of a sovereign prince, but his strength at sea now is very small. The fortifications are reckoned the best in the world, all cut in the solid rock with infinite expense and labour. Off this island we were tossed by a severe storm, and were very glad, after 8 days, to be able to put into Porta Farine on the African shore, where our ship now rides. At Tunis we were met by the English consul who resides there. I readily accepted the offer of his house for some days, being very curious to see this part of the world, and particularly the ruins of Carthage. I set out in his chaise at 9 at night, the moon being at full. I saw the prospect of the country almost as well as I could have done by daylight, and the heat of the sun is now so intolerable, 'tis impossible to travel at any other time. The soil is for the most part sandy, but everywhere fruitful of date, olive, and fig trees, which grow without art, yet afford the most delicious fruit in the world. Their vineyards and melon fields are enclosed by hedges of that plant we call Indian fig, which is an admirable fence, no wild beast being able to pass it. It grows a great height, very thick, and the spikes and thorns are as long and as sharp as bodkins. It bears a fruit much eaten by the peasants, and which has no ill taste. It being now the season of the Turkish Ramazan, or Lent, and all here professing at least the Mohammedan religion, they fast till the going down of the sun, and spend the night in feasting. We saw under the trees companies of the country people, eating, singing, and dancing to their wild music. They are not quite black, but all mulattoes, and the most frightful creatures that can appear in a human figure. They are almost naked, only wearing a piece of coarse serge wrapped about them. The women have their arms to their very shoulders, and their necks and faces adorned with flowers, stars, and various sorts of figures impressed by gunpowder, a considerable addition to their natural deformity, which is, however, esteemed very ornamental among them, and I believe they suffer a good deal of pain by it. About 6 miles from Tunis we saw the remains of that noble aqueduct which carried the water to Carthage over several high mountains, the length of 40 miles. There are still many arches entire. We spent 2 hours viewing it with great attention, and Mr. Wortley assured me that of Rome is very much inferior to it. The stones are of a prodigious size, and yet all polished, and so exactly fitted to each other very little cement has been made use of to join them. Yet they may probably stand 1,000 years longer, if art is not made use of to pull them down. Soon after daybreak I arrived at Tunis, a town fairly built of very white stone, but quite without gardens, which they say were all destroyed when the Turks first took it, none having been planted since. The dry sand gives a very disagreeable prospect to the eye, and the want of shade contributing to the natural heat of the climate renders it so excessive that I have much ado to support it. It is true here every noon the refreshment of the sea breeze, without which it would be impossible to live, but no fresh water but what is preserved in the cisterns of the rains that fall in the month of September. The women of the town go veiled from head to foot under a black crape, being mixed with a breed of renegadoes, are said to be many of them fair and handsome. This city was besieged in 1270 by Louis, King of France, who died under the walls of it of a pestilential fever. After his death, Philip his son, and our Prince Edward, son of Henry III, raised the siege on honourable terms. It remained under its natural African kings till betrayed into the hands of Barbarossa, admiral of Solomon the Magnificent. The Emperor Charles V expelled Barbarossa, but it was recovered by the Turks under the conduct of Sinan Pasha in the reign of Selim II. From that time till now it has remained tributary to the Grand Signior, governed by a bey, who suffers the name of subject to the Turk, but has renounced the subjection, being absolute, and very seldom paying any tribute. The great city of Baghdad is at this time in the same circumstances, and the Grand Signior connives at the loss of these dominions, for fear of losing even the titles of them. I went very early yesterday morning, after one night's repose, to see the ruins of Carthage. I was, however, half broiled in the sun, and overjoyed to be led into one of the subterranean apartments, which they call the stables of the elephants, but which I cannot believe were ever designed for that use. I found in them many broken pieces of columns of fine marble and some of porphyry. I cannot think anybody would take the insignificant pains of carrying them thither, and I cannot imagine such fine pillars were designed for the use of stables. I am apt to believe they were summer apartments under their palaces, which the heat of the climate rendered necessary. They are now used as granaries by the country people. While I sat here, from the town of Thence, not far off, many of the women flocked in to see me, and we were equally entertained with viewing one another. Their posture in sitting, the colour of their skin, their lank black hair falling on each side their faces, their features and the shape of their limbs differ so little from their country people the baboons, 'tis hard to fancy them a distinct race. I could not help thinking there had been some ancient alliances between them. When I was a little refreshed by rest and some milk and exquisite fruit they brought me, I went up the little hill where once stood the castle of Bursa, and from thence I had a distinct view of the situation of the famous city of Carthage, which stood on an isthmus, the sea coming on each side of it. 'Tis now a marshy ground on one side, where there are salt ponds. Strabo calls Carthage 40 miles in circumference. There are now no remains of it but what I have described, and the history of it is too well known to want my abridgment of it. You see, sir, that I think you esteem obedience better than compliments. I have answered your letter by giving you the accounts you desired, and have reserved my thanks to the conclusion. I intend to leave this place tomorrow, and continue my journey through Italy and France. In one of those places I hope to tell you, by word of mouth, that I am your humble servant, etc., etc. Letter 16, Genoa, August the 28th, O.S. 1718. Genoa is situated in a very fine bay, and being built on a rising hill, intermixed with gardens, and beautified with the most excellent architecture, gives a very fine prospect off at sea, though it lost much of its beauty in my eyes, having been accustomed to that of Constantinople. The Genoese were once masters of several islands in the archipelago, and all that part of Constantinople which is now called Galata. There betraying the Christian cause by facilitating the taking of Constantinople by the Turk, deserved what has since happened to them, even the loss of all their conquests on that side to those infidels. They are at present far from rich, and are despised by the French, since their Doge was forced by the late king to go in person to Paris to ask pardon for such a trifle as the arms of France over the house of the envoy being spattered with dung in the night. This, I suppose, was done by some of the Spanish faction, which still makes up the majority here, though they dare not openly declare it. The ladies affect the French habit, and are more genteel than those they imitate. I do not doubt but the custom of cicisbeos has very much improved their airs. I know not whether you ever heard of those animals. Upon my word, nothing but my own eyes could have convinced me there were any such upon earth. The fashion began here, and is now received all over Italy, where the husbands are not such terrible creatures as we represent them. There are none among them such brutes as to pretend to find fault with a custom so well established and so politically founded, since I am assured that it was an expedient first found out by the Senate, to put an end to those family hatreds which tore their state to pieces, and to find employment for those young men who were forced to cut one another's throats pour passer le temps. And it has succeeded so well that, since the institution of cicisbei, there has been nothing but peace and good humour among them. These are gentlemen who devote themselves to the service of a particular lady. I mean a married one, for the virgins are all invisible and confined to convents. They are obliged to wait on her to all public places, such as the plays, the operas, and assemblies, which are here called conversations, where they wait behind her chair, take care of her fan and gloves, if she play, have the privilege of whispers, etc. When she goes out, they serve her instead of lackeys, gravely trotting by her chair. 'Tis their business to prepare for her a present against any day of public appearance, not forgetting that of her own name. In short, they are to spend all their time and money in her service, who rewards them accordingly, for opportunity they want none, but the husband is not to have the impudence to suppose this any other than pure platonic friendship. 'Tis true, they endeavour to give her a cicisbeo of their own choosing, but when the lady happens not to be of the same taste, as that often happens, she never fails to bring it about to have one of her own fancy. In former times one beauty used to have 8 or 10 of these humble admirers, but those days of plenty and humility are no more. Men grow more scarce and saucy, and every lady is forced to content herself with one at a time. You may see in this place the glorious liberty of a republic, or, more properly, an aristocracy, the common people being here as errant slaves as the French. But the old nobles pay little respect to the Doge, who is but 2 years in his office, and whose wife, at that very time, assumes no rank above another noble lady. 'Tis true, the family of Andrea Doria, that great man, who restored them that liberty they enjoy, have some particular privileges. When the Senate found it necessary to put a stop to the luxury of dress, forbidding the wearing of jewels and brocades, they left them at liberty to make what expense they pleased. I look with great pleasure on the statue of that hero, which is in the court belonging to the house of Duke Doria. This puts me in mind of their palaces, which I can never describe as I ought. Is it not enough that I say they are, most of them, the design of Palladio? The street called Strada Nova is perhaps the most beautiful line of building in the world. I must particularly mention the vast palaces of Durazzo, those of the 2 Balbi, joined together by a magnificent colonnade, those of the Imperiale at this village of San Pierrepont, and another of the Doria. The perfection of architecture and the utmost profusion of rich furniture are to be seen here, disposed with the most elegant taste and lavish magnificence. But I am charmed with nothing so much as the collection of pictures by the pencils of Raphael, Paolo Veronese, Titian, Carracci, Michelangelo, Guido, and Correggio, which 2 I mentioned last as my particular favourites. I own I can find no pleasure in objects of horror, and in my opinion the more naturally a crucifix is represented, the more disagreeable it is. These, my beloved painters, show nature, and show it in the most charming light. I was particularly pleased with a Lucretia in the house of Balbi. The expressive beauty of that face and bosom gives all the expression of pity and admiration that could be raised in the soul by the finest poem upon that subject. A Cleopatra of the same hand deserves to be mentioned, and I should say more of her if Lucretia had not at first engaged my eyes. Here are also some inestimable ancient bustos. The church of St. Lawrence is built of black and white marble, where is kept that famous plate of a single emerald, which is not now permitted to be handled, since a plot, which they say was discovered, to throw it on the pavement and break it, a childish piece of malice, which they ascribed to the King of Sicily, to be revenged for their refusing to sell it to him. The Church of the Annunciation is finely lined with marble. The pillars are of red and white marble. That of St. Ambrose has been very much adorned by the Jesuits, but I confess all the churches appeared so mean to me after that of Sancta Sophia, I can hardly do them the honour of writing down their names. But I hope you will own I have made good use of my time in seeing so much, since 'tis not many days that we have been out of the quarantine, from which nobody is exempted coming from the Levant. Ours indeed was very much shortened, and very agreeably passed in Monsieur d'Avenant's company, in the village of St. Pierrepont, about a mile from Genoa, in a house built by Palladio, so well designed and so nobly proportioned, 'twas a pleasure to walk in it. We were visited here only by a few English, in the company of a noble Genoese, commissioned to see we did not touch one another. I shall stay here some days longer, and could almost wish it were for all my life, but mine, I fear, is not destined to so much tranquillity. End of section 6. End of the Turkish Embassy Letters by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu.